Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views of myself, Salailo Mokudira, and it's time for our hashtag Africa Focus feature. If you're new to the show, this is part of the show where we focus on some of the biggest and notable stories on the African continent. And this time around, we'll be looking at Uganda, where nearly, 4 decades after his first takeover of power as rebel leader, Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni has officially been sworn in for a record 7th presidential term, extending one of Africa's longest running political reigns and raising fresh questions and concerns about democracy, about succession and dissent in the East African nation. At, I think is around 81 years old now. Museveni insists that he remains the guarantee of stability and economic progress. But critics argue that Uganda is sliding deeper into authoritarianism, with opposition figures repeatedly arrested, constitutional term and age limits completely removed, and growing concerns over shrinking civic freedoms. The inauguration itself has once again put Uganda's political future under the spotlight, with analysts asking whether the country is witnessing stability or the entrenchment of a permanent rule of some sort. And to help us unpack the implications of all of this and to ask those very, very pertinent questions is none other than journalist with Kigezi News out in Uganda, Brother Goodluck Musinguzi, who's joining us via our virtual platform. Brother Goodluck, always a pleasure having you on News and Views. Really appreciate you giving us your time. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Greetings from Uganda, and thanks for the kind words.
No, the pleasure is all ours. And I want us to jump right into it. If you can just give us the mood on the ground right now in Uganda, following President Museveni's swearing in for a 7th time. How are ordinary Ugandans reacting to this following that very, very contentious elections?
What is interesting is that we had the swearing ceremony on Tuesday, and the next day, which was Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we are going to be having the Parliament of Uganda being sworn in, and therefore there is kind of bee activity in town, in the city. Actually, I just come from there. We had a conference. It had to be postponed because all hotels are being booked for members of parliament and their dignitaries to swear in. And therefore the situation here is interesting, that when we are in politics, the next day, it looks like 24 hours are enough for us to get over something, and I don't know why it happens like that. But I can tell you now, most people, if you go on social media, if you go on radios and TVs, people are talking about their members of parliaments swearing in, and also the contentious post of the speakership, where we have a speaker who has become, who is allegedly, that she has become so extravagant to an extent being equated to Marie Antoinette, if you remember the history of France. And therefore,
let them eat cake.
Come again?
I'm saying Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake.
Yes, let them eat cake. She's driving Eloise. When people think that the situation out there in terms of healthcare, schools, and other things, things are not moving so well. So interestingly is that, and you remember on this show, I told you last time that for me, my focus and that of the opposition should be on the transition. That if they focus very well on the transition, because age is not on the side of President Yoweri Museveni, believe me or not, at one point he's going to go. But when people kept focusing on him, I felt that they missed the point, because Uganda had gone through so many wars. We had 9 presidents in a period of few years, and therefore, when people saw the years coming with the president being leading, especially in terms of the peace and holding the country together. So I think the opposition should have focused on the transition. And in between, yes, despite of what happened in the last elections, And of course, there are other people who are still in prison. That's another contentious issue that lingers. But it looks like also the opposition is in disarray. So they need to really come back together. For example, Bobby Wine, Chagulanyi, who was the leading opposition candidate, is out of the country. And therefore, for me, he leads the biggest number of MPs, opposition MPs in parliament. If he needs to come back and they sit and they think about what next, because also remember we have another important activity that's going to happen in this country, the oil excavation. Actually, the first oil is going to come out most likely in the coming month or July. So people are focusing on some of those things, but in terms of the politics, is that these people need to come back and sit together and say, where did we make a mistake? But could they focus on the transition, on who is going to come back after this one? For me, that's where I would put, because even if we speak so much has gone under the river or below the bridge, and we might not change that.
No, I completely agree with you. And I think maybe that's where we can turn the direction of our conversation to say the succession plan. What does that look like? What does life effectively look like for Ugandans post Museveni? I mean, 81 years of age. I think it's only by God's grace, that he's still with us, and we don't know how much longer. The conversation that you just sparked in my head right now about succession, looking at the state of politics in Uganda at this moment, are you seeing a success of some sort? Are Ugandans, throwing names, around on who might be the next president after the departure of Yoweri Museveni, whether it's by resignation or by, I don't know, the will of God, if you may?
What is interesting, I read Onyango Bo's letter. He's a prominent journalist who is based a Ugandan journalist who is based in Kenya. He said he thinks President Yoweri Museveni Uganda is going to be disintegrated. Quite very eye-catching and disturbing. But I was talking to somebody this morning via WhatsApp chat, somebody who is based in Karamoja, that is northeast of this Uganda, northwest of this Uganda, of this country. And we were discussing something around that. He said that I think anybody who promotes violence or who promotes the division after all these years should be nipped before it comes out. So will people be looking at reconciliation? Will people be looking at continued holding together of the country? Now, if for example, if we go by the words of Onyango Bo, if the country disintegrates in fighting and we destroy everything we have, whom will it serve? Whom will it help? And therefore, so those are the questions. For the leading party, the National Resistance Movement, the talk is about the son of the president. The opposition, we still have Bobby Wine as the leading opposition member. And therefore, the other political parties, but we also remember we saw some splits in political parties. Actually, most of the political parties have had other two groups, one or two groups come out of them. That means they seem not to agree. And for me, if they were to win my vote or my support, I think they need to start being an opposition that talks about issues. So, for example, what do they talk about oil? What do they talk about industrialization? Why do they talk about? And if you remember, there is an interview recently with American reporters with the leading opposition candidate. They asked him what were the points, what were the issues that you were pushing in the last elections. How many members of parliament do you have? Because the constitution of Uganda, if you don't have majority in parliament, looks like very hard to. So for me, in the coming days, we seem to know that the NRM, which is the leading party, has somebody they are pushing for. That could not augur well with some people maybe who have been yearning for change. after 40 years to say when is NRM and the other, but it all depends on how organized you are. At the end of the day in life, it's not about how you wish. Wishing is one thing, but how organized are you?
No, most definitely. Musinguzi, good luck. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on News and Views, and I hope we chat again soon.
Thank you very much.
There we go. I think one of our favorite journalists coming out of East Africa, Musinguzi Goodluck, at giving us insight on the feel on the ground when it comes to the swearing in of Yoweri Museveni for the seventh time, and just getting the temperature of what the country is feeling and the conversations that are being had. And I think he mentioned something that's quite poignant: the fact that we move on so quickly, and it's the case also here in South Africa, that in politics, 24 hours we are over it. The conversation in Uganda right now, it's about who's going to be in parliament and who's going to be sworn in, and it has slightly moved away from the swearing in of the president, which happened on Tuesday, while the rest of Africa and the rest of the world looks back and says, hey, since the 80s, man. But it happens everywhere, even here in South Africa. Scandals after scandals happen. It's what's under the bridge. But I think a very, very important point that he raised was things have happened. What's the succession plan? Where does Uganda go after Yoweri Museveni's quote-unquote reign? And I think that's where the eyes and ears of Africa should be. What will Uganda look like post this era? And I think that's going to be the most defining moment of Uganda's future, because I think you can say whatever you want. Regionally, Uganda remains very, very strategically important, especially in East Africa, when you look at security matters and some of the alliances that they've had and the support that they've given a largely unstable, East African region. They've been relatively stable when you consider a lot of things. So it'll be interesting if the next leadership or the next in line after President Yoweri Museveni is going to be a character that could take Uganda from being a country with so much potential to a country that can actually realize its potential and be one of the power players on the African continent. And we'll be looking at that with very, very keen eyes and ears. This has been #Africa Focus with me, Selailo Makhudire, looking at Uganda with our good friend Musinguzi Goodluck, coming to us live from Kampala. Going to take a quick break. We'll be back with you after this.